What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm excited to have one of my best friends, Miles, and/or Christian Cameron. However you want to, go about your day, and however you want to read him. But Christian, how are you doing today?
We're both great. I really wish I could split my screen and wear two different T-shirts just to. Anyway, thanks very much for having me. As you know, we're old pals at this point, but
Yeah.
it's great to be here. It's 7 days till Artifact Space is released, and I'm ludicrously excited considering this is book 43.
I mean, you got to get excited about every book, right?
Actually, I do. Maybe I'm easily pleased. I don't know, but I actually do. Every book is fresh. I kind of go like, ooh, and I have a book coming out, and yeah.
But every time you get that box of books, you're like, I wonder what's in here.
Once in a while, the boxes of books, like you should see my basement. I have suits of armor. I have reenacting gear. I have little men and women and aliens and orcs. Armies and armies and armies. I have terrain for all of my little people. And then I have boxes of books. Boxes of other people's books. Because I mostly only keep research books upstairs in the library, and then boxes of my own books, which is kind of embarrassing. So once in a while, I just hand them out to people and go like, "Please come by my house and have." Yeah,
that's awesome. You'll have to give a tour of your basement sometime.
It's actually not a bad idea. It would probably be entertaining because there's also a jewelry shop and a metal shop. Anvil.
How big is your basement?
It's pretty big. Like I guess I could walk down there, but I don't have a good camera set up at the moment. We got a normal Toronto house and we have a basement, and Aurora Simmons, who's my co-instructor, and anyway, she has a jewelry shop down there, and then that's really just an extension of my metal shop, because as anybody listening, all three people who've ever owned a suit of armor, you have to be able to repair armor if you own armor.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Especially, especially when you walk through the snow in it.
that kind of thing. That's just cleaning and oiling. And I'd love to say something arrogant like that's what squires are for, but it's surprising how hard it is to get a good squire these days.
Yeah, exactly. So what have you been up to since TBRCon? I mean, it's been almost 6 months, I guess, since we last chatted. What's been going on?
Done a bunch of writing. In fact, the two big things in my house are, well, my partner, my wife, has a real job, and that takes up a whole bunch of time. But I have a daughter about to graduate from high school in COVID-19. And if that doesn't sound like a thing taking up time, let me just course correct for you. That's been a lot of time. It's real good. She's actually going to graduate. She did just fine, but that was very stressful on people in high school. Probably all kids in school, but especially high school, doing things remotely, doing things online. Anyway, so there was that. I did write most of a fantasy novel that we'll see. Like, I wrote it kind of for fun. It's a long story, but I guess I'll really fast just say it's called The Sword. It's actually a prequel to Cold Iron, written about maybe 1,000 years before Aranther is born. And it sort of answers the question of how did this sword, which has a person embedded in it, come to be? And also kind of the darker and slightly more comical side of being possessed by a sword. And in rough outline, and it isn't meant to be a comedy, but I have enjoyed writing parts of it to be funny. A very bad man, a sort of annoyingly bad man, like a lazily bad man, gets a magic sword that is relentlessly good and causes him to look at the world. The sword just makes him see like slavery and oppression and things he's ignored all his life. If you think that there might be a political overtone to this, you're totally right. I've frankly been having a ball writing it. It may never sell to anyone, but who knows? Maybe I'll just put it up on my website. But I've been having a real good time with that. And then more recently, I started writing Deep Black, which is the sequel to Artifact Space, which I'm pretty sure is what we're here to talk about. So I'll just whip out a copy and go like, I think this is the most beautiful cover I have ever had.
It's gorgeous. Absolutely.
That was my plug. Yeah. And so I started writing Deep Black. which I'm, I should not say, quite so often. Artifact space got dumped into my brain. I've told you this story. I shan't run it past you again, but it wrote it.
Go ahead.
Well, I was sitting in a movie theater watching Little Women with my wife, and a whole lot of stuff apparently came together in my head all in about, I'd say, 15 seconds. And suddenly the whole novel went plop into my head. And I spent the next 46 days writing it down, but it was like I already knew everything. That's actually not true in one respect. The part that wasn't done for me was the world building. I had to actually do all the world building. It's as if I got the plot and characters, but I had to figure out like, why are there huge ships in space and other things like that. So that was fun. Deep Black is different. I won't pretend I don't know what's happening. I know the whole arc through the end of the series, although I will also confess to you, and no one's going to hear this podcast, right? This is just you and me talking privately, that I'd love to write 25 books in this universe.
Good
because
night.
now that I'm in it, no, it's weird. I am so in love with this universe, and I keep thinking of side stories that have nothing to do with Marka and Barrow or any of the main characters. And I'm like, I had this whole idea for a sort of bounty hunter trying to go good on one of the worlds. And I'm like, no, I don't think this is Star Trek. I don't think they're going to want the 31 spinoffs. Anyway, however, I'm writing Deep Black, and it's different because I have to resolve the deliberate mystery of the first book. And I'm being helped. Sorry, I brought a prop. I'm being helped because I love to do research, right? I write historical novels and I do a ton of research. And even when I write fantasy novels, I like wear the armor and swing the swords and try and find a wyvern to kill. So I'll figure out how all of that works. So yes, I'm trying to do research for science fiction, which I know everyone should be laughing at this point. Yes, I look into the future with my crystal ball. No, but Caleb Scharf, actually a pretty famous guy, astrobiologist, astrophysicist, and this is a book called The Ascent of Information. And I just want to say that it has been incredibly helpful in helping me sort of both create and solve the mysteries. And it just came out this week, by the way. And he writes for all the big scientific magazines. And, you want to have a good look at the future, read the people who are actually doing the science. Earlier this week, I had the real fun of doing an interview with Popular Science. And all they wanted to know was, like, how do you use real science?
That's awesome.
And that was super fun. And I basically said, like, okay, so I wasn't that great at science in university. I took physics for poets, but I do know how to read other smart people's views on physics. That seemed to satisfy them.
I just followed the smart people's advice, and that seems to work out for me.
Exactly. Well, one of my favorite quotes of all time is supposedly FDR said, "I'm not a first-rate mind. I'm a third-rate mind who knows how to choose first-rate minds and then listen to them." And I'm like, yeah, there's that may define good leadership at some point,
Yeah. There's a lot of truth behind that. So how many books do you have planned so far in this series? Is it just 2, or do you actually want to do 25?
for Artifact Space?
Yeah.
3.
Okay. And does it have a series title? I don't know if I've seen that.
Yeah, Arcana Impere, The Secrets of Empire.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
fancy.
Well, in case I'm really speaking to the world, not to you, but in case you don't know this, behind what might on the surface appear to be a pretty straightforward space opera is 100,000-year genocide. It's just lurking out there. There's a whole race, and they're gone. And as the book progresses, this goes from a sort of interesting factoid to a more interesting factoid, right? And you kind of go like, where'd they go? And that's going to turn out to be a huge determinant in book 2. It's going to turn out to be sort of like the murder mystery. It goes from the elephant in the room to like, oh, we need to solve this because maybe our apparent allies aren't really very nice.
I gotcha. Intriguing.
Yeah,
I'm here for it.
I'm doing my best. I mean, that is like a meta plot. There's like the story arc, and then above that there's sort of a meta plot about some politics, and then maybe above that there's like aliens you've never even met and 150,000-year-old conflict, that kind of thing. And maybe above that there's like some sort of quantum structure, and then God. I don't know. I really don't. I don't worry about above the meta plot that I'm writing, but it could be there.
It's like the tip of an iceberg that's also on top of another iceberg, and it's also maybe above or below a pyramid.
To quote Terry Pratchett, turtles all the way down.
So I kind of want to start off. So I know we had a podcast chat. Gosh, it's been, I don't know, a year and a half now. Sometimes it feels like it hasn't been long, and sometimes it feels like it's been forever. But podcasts, it's been kind of a while. But tell everybody a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got into writing. And I know a couple of my contributors want to know how you got into realistic swordplay.
That's a big question. So, how did I get into writing? Well, once upon a time, I was in high school and I really liked writing. I wasn't very good at it, and I wrote a novel that is so bad that you will never see any part of it. Not even the first page, not even to get 100 likes on Twitter. Nope, that's not going to happen. And then I wrote a fantasy novel, absolutely equally as bad. I had just read a novel that I adored by a woman named Ellen Kushner, and I tried to copy it. Like I can't even begin to describe how bad. Anyway, still like Ellen Kushner though. And then I was in the Navy, and I learned a lot about writing from the Navy. I learned to write fast. I learned to not nitpick what I had written. And then I wrote 8 spy novels with my dad. And my dad was a career novelist and also an academic, and also a very, I don't know if you've ever worked with your dad. It's an experience that many of my friends share, often building a garden or, putting something up. And I think all working with dad shares a certain level of criticism that's not as friendly as you might have expected from
a little bit, just a little bit.
Someone who isn't your dad. And that's what writing was like. Yep, all the time. And some harsh words were said. But I did learn a ton. My dad was a very good writer. I sometimes worry that he was a better writer than I will ever be. And I did learn a ton from him. I believed things that were false, and I could tell your viewers if you like, but I believed things that weren't true about how writing worked, and Dad taught me otherwise, and that was really great. So those 3 things made me a writer, and I sort of backed into being a writer because I was a clandestine operations officer, which is a fancy way of saying I was a spy, and I had an idea for a spy novel. Fancy that. And I rattled it off to my dad thinking he'd write it, and instead he said we should write it, and he already had an agent, so I didn't have to, like the things I didn't have to do. I didn't have to find an agent. I've still got the same agent I had in 1996. My dad's agent. It's like I inherited her. That's really unfair, by the way, because she is a good friend. And I don't know. I love to write. I would probably write if nobody paid me. Isn't that a sad comment? And I think because
you do write some that you don't get paid for, though, right? Because don't you? You do some stuff on your website, and because I know there was a story you were writing that you were releasing like a chapter at a time, I think, to your subscribers.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just want to say, if any of my subscribers are listening, that as soon as I am done with Deep Black, I am going to go through and finish my Rangers of Shadow Deep novel, mostly because I want to know how it ends. And that perfectly describes my failing as a writer. I just want to tell these stories, and sometimes I am literally telling them to me. I mean, I hope to you, but I can't stop. And I'm very affected by things like reenacting and sword fighting, which I will get back to. I did notice that was part of your question, and gaming.
It was a very convoluted question.
and gaming. I was on a great panel at WorldCon back when we used to have like cons where we actually all sat together. And
I've forgotten everything previous to last year. Is just
BC, before COVID.
Yeah.
Anyway, in Dublin, I was on a great panel about gaming and fantasy. and I would never lie to anyone about this. I am definitely affected by games, and I use games as a sandbox often to test things out, like both plot lines and sometimes just fight scenes. Like you want to have a big boss fight, with magic. I can't do that in the backyard. I haven't figured out how to throw a fireball, but I can make it happen in a game and then go like, oh, that's a little unbalanced, or that wasn't as tense as I wanted to be. Anyway, when I find a game I love as much as Rangers of Shadow Deep, I really just wanted to support the author, who I thought had written a brilliant indie game and deserved more attention than he was getting. So I started a novel, and I will eventually finish it because it's fun. And it has lots of camping. I love to write camping. And how did I get into fighting? Sorry, I have more to say about camping. It's become a joke. We
can just have a whole episode about camping.
Well, it's become a joke amongst my friends. See, I do a thing over on Twitter called Writing Fighting, which has gotten mildly, small time famous, and that's great and really fun. But I really am sort of doing it as a public service because I want to help people who don't get to own armor and sharp weapons and stuff at least get a survey of how all that stuff works. But
it's amazing. I love watching your videos; they're fantastic.
And I try and keep them somewhat funny and somewhat lighthearted because, frankly, endless amounts of weapons and violence aren't that funny. But for 2 weeks this summer, or maybe more, I'm hijacking it and I'm going to call it Writing Camping. And that's because one of my favorite modern fantasy novels of all time is Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind, which I think is a brilliant novel. But camping, man, it doesn't work the way you think it does. And he admitted that in an interview. That's why I feel completely able to say that without in any way offending someone who I think is a brilliant author. But I actually years ago almost sat down to write him a letter going like, can I explain how you light a fire with flint and steel? And I wasn't a fantasy writer at the time, right? So it would have just been a dumbass fan letter. Whereas now it would be a pompous non-fan letter, and that changes the tone. But I really want to. I'm going to make 2 or 3 or 4 or 9 episodes of literally. This is how you make a fire with medieval equipment. This is how you boil water. I'm not kidding. This is how you boil water with all medieval equipment. This is what it looks like. This is what making a mule looks like with all medieval equipment. Just stuff like that, because people write these scenes. And I once heard a brilliant soliloquy by another fantasy writer, and it was quite brilliant, where she inveighed for half an hour about how people ate things in the Middle Ages that weren't stew. and I loved her for it. I was like, yes, you are my kind of writer. Please tell them why everything wasn't stew. And oh, by the way, they probably didn't have potatoes in medieval Europe. But, how did I get into swordsmanship? You thought I'd forgotten, but this is a Billy Connolly routine, and I will gradually circle around back to the beginning.
You don't forget anything. I know that. I know that about you.
Wow, tell my wife she would laugh her ass off.
So would mine.
I went to see a movie called The Three Musketeers when I was 11. It had Michael York and Raquel Welch. I still think it's one of the best fight movies ever filmed. And when I was done, I said to my dad, like, I'd like to learn to fence. Well, it turned out that not only did my dad already know how to fence, but he had taught stage fighting because my dad was a theater professional. And so we started with aluminum swords in the backyard. Some fingers were broken. And then we moved to ever better swords. And then I went and took fencing lessons. And then I won a bunch of fencing tournaments, and then I was really into fencing. So fencing conquered baseball in my life. I was going to be a professional baseball player. I mean, at least inside my head. That was my plan for the future at age 12. But by the time I was 16, I was going to go to the Olympics and be the first American to win foil, épée, and saber gold medals in the Olympics, which did not go down quite that way at all. But I did okay. Won a bunch of tournaments, and I fenced a lot, and it sort of took up my entire teenage life. And then I stopped. And I stopped for a bunch of reasons. There were girls. Girls never cared a bit about fencing. I actually took my first serious girlfriend to the Empire State Games in New York State. And after I felt devastatingly and brilliantly beaten a an opponent I was really worried about. I said, "Did you see that?" And she said, "Who won?"
Needless to say, that one didn't stick around long, huh?
No, it's not like being a quarterback on a football team. Like there's nothing to see. The two blades go like pop, 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 pop. A buzzer goes off.
Yeah.
So, but that gets to the heart of actually what disappointed me about fencing. It was never the Three Musketeers. It was completely stylized. Now, I now realize as somebody who teaches all kinds of fighting that I learned incredibly important lessons about how martial arts work from fencing. And it's not for nothing that Bruce Lee thought it was a fabulous martial art when he looked at it and kept telling all of his Asian martial arts friends, like, look at the things they've discovered, because those ruthless minds of the Enlightenment, they just took everything to pieces and started looking at them. Fencing has a lot to offer, but it is very stylized. And I wanted like big swords and stuff. So I fought in the SCA for a while in armor, and that was interesting. And I started to fight in armor, but I was like, no, this is not how people fought in the Middle Ages. And pardon me if you're in the SCA, it didn't look right, and the swords are wood, and anyway, I did a whole bunch of other fencing and reenacting, and then about 20 years ago, I ran into a bunch of people who were living my dream. They had fabulous suits of armor, and they were hitting each other with real swords, and I was like, wait, you mean during my military career you invented the perfect hobby for me, and now I'm too old? So I really got into the whole fighting and armor thing probably 20 years after my body would have been really happy for it. And there's nothing like being a 59-year-old tottering around in a suit of armor in a sport that is really intended for very muscular 24-year-olds. Fabulous. Fabulous.
Well, you wear it great. It looks phenomenal on you. So if it makes you feel,
you know
better.
What? I enjoy it enormously. Anybody who's an athlete knows you slow down enormously starting in age 50. And so what used to be my huge advantage, because I have really Olympic level speed, at least, is dwindling each year. And that's very sad. And muscle mass is dwindling each year. And I have a fabulous armor in the Czech Republic who I want to give a shout out to. His name is Jiří Klípak. He's a genius. And he keeps making me armor that just gets lighter and lighter. Without cheating.
Swell fellow.
without cheating and using titanium or anything like that. Just steel and chainmail. But the whole kit, because I know I can just pluck this one out of your brain. I know you're going to ask this. The whole kit wears, depending on what I'm wearing exactly, because I have different things I can put on, between 80 and 105 pounds when I've got it all on. Yeah, and I know that because I have to carry it through airport customs when I go to fight in Italy. And it's super fun. I have 2 suitcases and no clothes.
just have a carry-on with some shorts and some undershirts.
I'm at my business class luggage limit, and all I have for clothes is what I've stuffed inside the armor. It's very surprising to various landladies and hoteliers, because the 2 huge pieces of luggage roll into the lobby, and I think they go like, "Oh, a very serious customer," and then I'm in the same shorts 5 days in a row.
Right, just lounging by the pool. I can just imagine, you having the bellboy come down or something and try to like lift one up, and you're like, what the world are you carrying in here?
Honest to goodness, when I see anybody in a hotel staff who's like over the age of 30, I just go like, I got it, bro. Please let me. I don't want to break somebody. And I can't afford the heavy tips. This is the other thing I would say is that, oddly, fighting in armor isn't a rich man's sport, but it ought to be. The armor is expensive, and going overseas to fight is expensive. And, I am a modestly successful fantasy author, but not a like, oh, yes, I'm on a jet to England tomorrow. It's not like that.
With my 2 suitcases of armor.
With my 2 suitcases of armor. Yeah. There was a couple of, I know you don't need to know this, but there were a couple of great years where Air Transat, which is a like fly-by-night cheap tourist airline in Canada, decided my armor was sporting goods and it flew for free. And then they changed their minds. Those were the good days. It is sporting goods. It's a sport. Anyway. Yeah.
It's a sport. It's just not as widely popular as most sports.
I tried to convince them one year. Another guy ahead of me in the line had a surfboard. And I'm like, I take up much less room than that.
That's all that matters.
Right.
So, so I want to know what really, I guess, struck a chord where you were like, I'm going to start doing these writing fighting videos. I mean, I know, everybody talks about how realistic your fight scenes are in your books, and you're one of the best at writing fight scenes in your novels, along with your De Castell and Gwen and so forth, and that's why we had the panel at TBRCon. But what was like, I guess, the final nail in the coffin? You're like, okay, I'm gonna start doing all these videos, because you've got like over 70 now, right?
Yeah, 74 this morning. So curiously, it was actually another writer, Peter McLean, and he actually asked me, which was very nice of him. And I want to put in a plug right now for the social media. What really works on social media? Having friends and being nice to other people. And it's funny because I keep running into people who are like, oh, all people ever do on Twitter is, yell at each other. And I'm like, that is not my experience, at least with authors. Right. I find that authors tend to feed each other. And I owe this one to Peter. He fed me. He sent a video of a really cool, complex, and not immediately comprehensible Iaido move. Iaido is a Japanese martial art about drawing and using a katana, and it's a solo art. So you demonstrate and are tested, and I'm pretty sure this was a test at a very high level on particular set plays that are like scenarios, like you're walking down the street and somebody attacks you from behind a screen on the left side. So you have to step away, draw maybe while straight arming him, and then cut. Like you get what I'm saying. And I did some Iaido and I loved it. And in fact, Iaido I find very informative for looking at European set piece moves. Probably too complicated. Anyway, so Peter sent me this and in effect said, hey, Fokion 1, what's going on? Or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but like, what's this about? So I had to stare at it for a while, and then I wrote him an answer. And then later that afternoon, I thought like, okay, I think my answer was incomprehensible. I'll make him a video. So I went in the backyard, and there was snow and ice, and I didn't have a handy Japanese sword, so I used a European sword. And I was really just talking about like why the draw from the scabbard is so important and almost never covered in fantasy novels, right? Mm-hmm. People always just magically have their swords in their hands. And that is odd, at least for American writers, because to me, we all know that the draw is super important in a Western 6-gun fight. Mm-hmm. So how come we don't think a draw is really important in a sword fight? And I guess people imagine that when you're 300 meters away, you just draw your sword, but like not in a tavern fight, right? So I did a video, and I had never, ever in my life had 150 likes on a video. It's not my life. I mean, I'm old. I'm old, and Twitter was not my métier, right? So I just kind of went, oh, well, that's super fun. And then a whole bunch of people asked questions. You actually might have been one of the people who asked questions. And so I thought, okay, I'll make 5 of these and I'll answer the questions. So I just started answering you guys' questions with videos, and here we are. Like, and now I'm going to do black powder guns because Sebastian teased me. No, that's not really why, but it might be.
No, it's probably part of it.
Part of it. But yeah, I'm going to do flintlocks when I'm done with armor.
Oh, so cool.
Because I own a ton of them. I own the only real legitimate flintlock breech loader, amongst other things. So that'll be fun. And I'll be able to talk about things that do and don't happen with flintlocks. And I don't know. Anyway.
Well, because I know we've probably talked on this a couple of times. We always talk about the back scabbard and how it's like one of the worst things that you can imagine, but like so many fantasy stories have them. But it's like, how can you realistically pull it out? And then I think we had a mention about The Witcher, and they had made it to where I guess it was at least a little bit more, there's a little more ease in getting it out. But if you're shoved up against the wall, you're pretty much screwed no matter what. So you better have it out before you get to that point. And I think that kind of led to you showing about, how you can pull a sword out of a scabbard, but you actually have to like at least kind of jut it out a little bit because it catches. Isn't that right? Yep.
Yeah. And you turn it a little with your hand and push it back on your hip. one of the opening fight scenes in my, it's not meant to be comic. It's not a comic novel, but I am getting my points across. A much bigger and possibly better fighter who's wearing his sword in a back scabbard is shoved against a wall and ruthlessly killed by the protagonist. It's like a, what do you call it? It's like an homage. It's a reverse homage.
Yeah. So tell me, where can you find, I guess, your backlog of writing fighting videos? And then I guess I guess it'll be the same place you can find the writing camping. And then are you going to call it writing flintlocks, or are you going to call it writing?
You know what? It's
powder?
all going to be under writing fighting. Even the writing camping, it'll just keep the numbers going forward, because once you've established a brand, you just roll with the brand. But so my YouTube channel has everything after episode 40, and eventually I will spend a day backfilling. I'll be honest, I'm still adjusting to a world where social media is part of my job and not something that I occasionally do and feel guilty about. So really, for Artifact Space, this is the first time I've put a heavy attempt at advertising. I know. It actually makes me feel modestly guilty just to say that out loud. And social media support. And I won't pretend I didn't do writing fighting, at least partly to, raise audience interest and stuff like that. So now I have a YouTube channel. So on my YouTube channel, which has some very complicated alphanumeric sequence, people will just have to look up Christian Cameron. On my webpage, christiancameronauthor.com. That one is easy, christiancameronauthor.com. And they're all there, thanks to my brilliant webmaster, Rob McClellan, who is like one of the world's finest human beings, like yourself. He has sorted me out and kept me on the straight and narrow. And he's even categorized them like fighting in armor, Viking swords,
Wow.
which is great and makes it even easier for people to just get what they want.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know Rob, from like back in the day. So when I first started reviewing, it was actually, about 6 years ago. I was reading a lot of indie fiction, and he was helping a lot of the indie writers I was reading with their websites. And so Rob and I go way back. I mean, if you can call 6 years way back, but
yeah. I actually read and am friends with a bunch of indie authors, and I honestly think that the dividing line between indie and trad is much less important than it used to be, and will become even less important over the next few years. So
absolutely.
Rob has changed my life, like literally, because he gave me a website. I used to have a website that was sort of focused on reenacting, and I doubt it ever sold one book. I don't know why I had that exact website, but Rob was like, wouldn't you like a wouldn't you like a website that caused people to buy your books? Oh, that's a unique idea. Wow.
How many books deep were you at that point? You're
let's
43 now.
let's not talk about that. However, I will say that because of people like Dirk Ashton and Ben Galley and Rob, I'll probably put out The Sword, this novel that I keep mentioning instead of talking about Deep Black. I'll probably put out The Sword as an indie book myself.
That'd be awesome.
And partially just to see what that's like. Partially because I write so fast that editors hate me.
You do put out quite a few novels.
I have a really good fantasy novel that I really thought was coming out this year called Against All Gods, and Galance is holding it. I mean, they bought it, but they're holding it, waiting for Artifact Space, because it's super funny. When I'm going on a rant here. Pardon me. This is my rant. I'm on my soapbox. When I was young, reading fantasy and science fiction, and we didn't get to choose in my day. I mean, granted, there were dinosaurs walking the earth at the time, but there just wasn't enough to be choosy. So I read Fitz Lieber, and I read Mercedes Lackey, and I read Andrew Norton, and I read Robert Heinlein, because that's what there was a shelf about this big of fantasy, of speculative fiction total. Mm-hmm. You read what crossed that shelf, and you read it all, and you read it regardless of genre. And I think, frankly, that was really good, because The world we live in, where we're super divisive and people believe things and other people believe everything about that is a lie, I happen to feel that's a product of being bore-sighted on one view of the world. Even if I, as a lefty, think that's the correct view of the world, that doesn't mean I shouldn't get out there and read other views of the world. And, Mercedes Lackey and Robert Heinlein, they had very different views of the world. And I got them both. And Fritz Lieber and Andrew Norton, very different views of the world. I got them both. So I liked the old way, and I worry about genreification. I worry about going like, this is grimdark. Oh, I only read grimdark. Well, what if you missed that fantastic book by Jeanette Ng? Because you know what? She's not grimdark. That's never going to cross your radar.
Right.
And I do, and I really am concerned about that. And now I've forgotten your question because I went off on my own tangent. So you reminded me of my rant, but that wasn't an answer to your question. I admit it.
So good. I don't even remember what my question was now. I was so busy listening to your soapbox.
Oh, well, that is my soapbox. I just want everybody to expand their horizons and go, because if you think about it, and you named these guys yourself, but like you think about me and John Gwynn and Sebastian DeCastle, Evan Winter, I could spin off a bunch, and I think we all write really good, solid, respectable, modern epic fantasy. It's not particularly grim, but it's realistic. Mm-hmm. And we've sort of got a thing, and that's great. It's a good thing. But, I would totally encourage people to like leave us behind for a while and go out there and try feminist sci-fi, get outside your comfort zone, because all of speculative fiction is amazing. Yeah. There are so many good writers. And I guess that's what I mean about the border between traditional publishing and indie publishing. There is so much good stuff out there in indie. Some not so good stuff, but let's leave that aside. There's so much good stuff. Like, you could never stop reading.
Oh yeah.
Ever. You could just read and read and read and read and read. Which, if there are any teenagers out there who are having the adolescence I had, is the ideal world, right? You just want enough speculative fiction books to fill all the minutes between your homework and your fencing. Who needs sleep?
Oh, I remember my question. I don't know if you wanted to answer it though, because it was about when did you actually decide to have an author website with all the books you've written?
Oh,
I think you wanted to ignore that question.
No. I suck at websites. I won't pretend otherwise. So it was Rob. Who put them all on one website, and I had to face how many there were. Up until then, it was like a non-disclosure agreement with myself. I'm like, yeah, I have a few books.
There's more. There's a catalog somewhere.
Yeah.
I gotcha. So let's talk about Artifact Space, shall we? So I've read it. So several big name authors have read it. My buddy Nick Borelli has read it, and we have all loved it. But I want you to tell everybody what it's about. Tell us what can we expect in Artifact Space.
So I'm not used to having as many interviews as I've had in the last 2 weeks, so I'm going to talk about them a little. So I was on Sci-Fi Saturday Night, a podcast I have actually listened to of my own free will. And the two gentlemen who do Sci-Fi Saturday Night also enjoyed Artifact Space, but one of them gave me a shout line that I will wear forever. He called it "Little Orphan Annie Joins the Merchant Space Marines." And I thought, like, wow, why didn't I think of that? I could have sold the book. So, I noticed that a number of people have called it military sci-fi, and I don't resent that, but it wasn't meant to be military. They're merchants. And so, in the not so far future, all the things we're worried about have happened to Earth. The seas are mostly dead, although there's a character from Iceland who's seen a whale, and that's totally on purpose because I have a whale theme that it's really an imagery theme, and I like that sort of thing in writing. But you may notice that pods of whales kind of run through conversation all the way through the book. Anyway, the Earth's in a bad way, and at some point it got so bad that everybody stopped fooling around and tried to save the human race. by what was, we think of the World War II generation in America and England and so on as sort of the greatest generation. And I try to make clear that there was a there was a generation that went like let's call them the Robert Heinlein generation. Like, right, we're going to build the spaceships and we're going to get the hell out of here. And also we're going to make rules, and we're going to make rules that are still there 600 years in the future about how you treat other human beings and so on. And that's a big deal. So the characters talk about the age of scarcity, which is a nice Marxist term, because they don't have scarcity. They pretty much have what they want. They have medical care. They have, they're not scraping for oxygen while living on an orbital station. But you can see signs in their society that things haven't always been that great. There's a whole gender called androgens, and the androgens, they're not sexless at all. In fact, one of them is a major character, and obviously they have a sex life. But they also have clearly been created to lower birth rate on orbitals and in mining colonies, and that wasn't very nice, was it? So everything hasn't been great, I guess, is the point. And it's also important to my world building that you realize that science, hard science, real science, took a giant kick in the pants. In the desperate attempt to save the human race, some leaps forward were made, and then everybody stopped doing hard science to just build stuff. And you can totally see these pulses in human history. Look at what we created during World War II. We're still coasting on that pulse. Or the moonshot. A lot of computer science came out of a single pulse of invention. So I'm playing on that a little because I didn't actually want their technology to be vastly beyond ours. It's actually important to one of the plots that, to some extent, they're sort of recreating, I don't want to say science, but investigative science, like just the kind of science that modern economists think is useless, where really smart people look at a Petri dish and go like, what could we grow in this just for fun? Okay, that's not what the book's about. What the book's about is a young woman who's an orphan, who all her life has wanted to be a member of the service, the merchant service, and it's going to be taken away from her for reasons that you're going to take all 3 books to understand why she has been so targeted. But she's in an orphanage, and it's a state orphanage, and it sounds like a terrible place. Probably is. I read a little about state-run orphanages before I wrote the book. And she figures out a way to get out and to get herself into the service. And I deliberately, I'm going to give a bit of a spoiler here, so like turn off your computer if you don't want to hear this. But I deliberately set the first 6 pages to make it look like maybe she's a terrorist who's going to blow up the spaceship, right? Doesn't it have a sort of weird, like, who is this woman and what the heck is she doing, right?
Yeah.
And then once she's aboard, you realize all she's ever wanted in her life is to get aboard this spaceship, and she'll basically do anything. Another interviewer actually said it was all very Heinlein-esque. Interesting. I was a huge Heinlein fan as a young person. I totally admit that some of Heinlein is now problematic, and I won't even go there. But I may be homaging to Heinlein. I don't know. What I wanted it to be was Star Trek. I wanted it to be hopeful. It's not the eternal war of black versus white like Star Wars. It's trade and complex politics in space, while a solid, maybe even brilliant, but definitely solid young woman tries to overcome all the crap that has been dealt to her to have a career. I mean, and that may not sound that great, but she has to deal with some very serious crap. And I loved writing her character. And by the way, that's not me. I could never overcome all that stuff. That was, again, from people I know and people I know who've overcome adversity and stuff like that. And it was really fun to write because I wanted it to be hopeful. And when I say it was Star Trek instead of Star Wars, I know that dichotomy is popular in the SFF world. And it's popular for a reason. Like, Star Trek is about a hopeful future where we're all trying to be better, where there was progress. And it's not just in technology, where, Uhuru is on the bridge in 1967. And wow, maybe there's going to be black people in space. Amazing. And definitely in that vein, maybe we have gotten better. Even though we killed off planet Earth, maybe we learned a valuable lesson from that. So it's about Mark and Barrow trying to make it, and then there's a giant political plot. I can't say otherwise. I write giant political plots, fantasy, sci-fi, historical novels. I like a giant political plot because I believe in nuance and a million shades of gray. Because there's definitely good and evil in artifact space, but there's also just people trying to get theirs and people trying to get by and people making crap up as they go along.
You've never done that ever.
No. And then it's also a romance. And I got some really nice comments from a friend of mine named Janie Wirtz, who's a way more famous fantasy author than I will probably ever be, that I had really hit the romance thing. So I'm not ashamed to say I was aiming to make it be a reverse Jane Austen, with some gender role reversal. I like a good game as an author. And that was fun. And it's not for nothing that the protagonist male is called Dorcas, because that's a good Charles Dickens name. And there's even puns. Anyway, we'll leave that alone. And it's a murder mystery. And the murder mystery is someone killed an alien race 100,000 years ago. And does it even matter?
So you thought this whole book while watching Little Women?
Yeah. I fear I've told this story too many times, but I will happily tell it again. I believe that the thought that sparked the cascade, I don't know if you've ever read Cascade Theory, but it's about how the brain works in neuroscience. And the thought that sparked the cascade. So I'm watching the movie, and Amy, I wish I could remember the actress's name, brilliant young actress, is basically saying to her lifelong friend, he says oh, you're a great artist. And she says, I'm not. And you know what that means? That means that now I get to have some rich guy's babies. That's my life. And right, it's 1868, and this is the world of an upper middle class woman. And I believe my cascade thought was, what if Amy was in space? I'm not kidding. I'm I think my wife muttered something like, that hasn't changed as much as it should have, or something like that. And I'm yeah, how far in the future do we have to go? I think it just literally, and then kind of like the way once the Star Trek movies came out, that the ship just doesn't bang into warp speed. It kind of that was how it felt. The jump to warp speed. And then all of a sudden, I could see the whole thing. I could see the character. I could see the orphanage. I could see, anyway, the whole thing. The only thing that didn't jump into my head was the first 6-7 pages, which again, I'm spoilering, but which is her escape from the orphanage. Those were suggested by Gillian Redfern, and she was totally right. Gillian Redfern, if you don't know, is my editor at Gallant's. She basically said, I started with her coming to the ship. And Jillian said, I want to know how she got there. I want to get the feeling of her flight from the orphanage. And she was right. That's why she's a great editor, because she was right. And here's my advice to young writers. Believe your editor. They are paid a lot of money to know more than you about how good your book will be. I'm 58 and I still believe my editor. There, that's my.
Is that your mini soapbox?
Yep. I'm glad I keep you amused.
all the time. You don't even have to talk to me. I'll just follow you on Twitter and be like, okay, he's got me for today. Especially with the writing finding videos. I remember which episode it was the other day, but you had a GIF of you just I can still do everything.
No, that wasn't me. That was from Dylan at Fantasy Pot. It's the aging brain. Dylan and Charles.
Yeah,
Dylan,
I know what you're talking about. Is it fantasy fiction? Fantasy fiction,
thank you. And they are great. And they and Dylan is like the fastest GIF in the West. I would never take him on. Although Kareem Mahfouz, and he's also really fast on a GIF, and I think that they should have a GIF off at some point. But I just like to force other people to have challenges that I don't have to participate.
So And now I know that you're writing the sequel, and you've used your amazing new novel that you've read in order to help you science a bit.
Yeah,
Well,
let me just say I've
yeah.
left out a huge thing because
Oh,
I'm trying to be witty and funny, and that is I was actually a backseat carrier aviator in the U.S. Navy. So um, years ago, I was at Fest, and I spotted one of my great heroes in SFF, which is Alistair Reynolds. I worship the ground Alistair Reynolds walks on, and I'm not afraid of many things, and I certainly wasn't afraid of going and plunking down in the empty seat next to Alistair Reynolds and going all fanboy all the time. I just gushed and I name dropped and I did whatever I could to catch his attention. And suddenly, in the middle of my gush, he said, "You were on aircraft carriers?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I've always thought that aircraft carriers were like, the closest we've come to big spaceships." And sometime in that conversation, he said something like, I don't swear he said these exact words, "You should write a book, with aircraft carrier like spaceships." And Jill Redfern leaned over from the seat behind me and said, "I'd buy that." Now, if you're a professional speculative fiction writer, as I am, this is my only job. The words "I'll buy that" from your editor are super important words that never ever leave your head. So Alistair Reynolds played a major role, and that's why I was so flattered that he gave a cover quote, because I really love his fiction. I think he's a genius. And so Alistair Reynolds and the Navy. And one of the things, I won't say it drives me crazy, but when you talked about writing fighting and stuff, I love authenticity. I sort of want authenticity to be my brand name when I write. So I try and get everything right. And it's not just the fighting, it's cooking and dancing. I'm big on dancing in books. I try and put dancing in every book, and singing, and I don't know, all those things. So when you try and do authenticity in science fiction, one of the things I tried to do right was the organized way in which air traffic works in the modern world. If you've ever flown, I don't know if you have, in the front seat in the cockpit, you know that there's a whole bureaucratic world to handle your point A to point B air travel. And you have to talk to the tower, and then you have to talk to your local ATC, your local air traffic controller, and and then there's bigger ATCs, and there's controllers out over the central Atlantic, and there's radar stations that spot you, and they talk to you, and you get what I'm saying.
yeah.
And I have to assume that it would work that way in space. And the last time I read a novel that really caught a flavor of that was actually C.J. Sherry's Merchanters' Luck and Down Below Station. She seems to understand perfectly because she's got beacons that talk to ships, ships talk to beacons, and she masterfully also covered out the time dilation and the red and blue shift of information. If you come hurtling into a system, you're packing all the information you're coming into, right? And it comes faster and faster until you start slowing down because you're entering the data field from outside at speed. And she did that, and it's very good for building tension. It's really good for telling the reader, here it comes, this is going to be the fight scene. Here it comes, this is the mystery, because none of the beacons are showing.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't ignore the fact that I kind of stole some of that from C.J. Sherry. But also my experience, especially in the Mediterranean, flying out at night over the Mediterranean or the Persian Gulf, talking to people, talking to air traffic controls, talking to Iranian air traffic control, really fed how that should sound, how it should sound in the cockpit, how it should sound, dealing with your ship. How do you land on a ship? Space shuttles just land on the Enterprise. Nobody ever has to do anything. That's not my experience of landing on an aircraft carrier. So I tried to get all that across too. Probably too much information, but and I think that's why people called it. A couple of people have called it a military science fiction novel. But to me, a military science fiction novel is about a war, and there's no war in this.
Mm-hmm.
This is merchant ships who occasionally have problems that are settled with violence, but mostly they're trying to get a cargo out and a cargo back.
Yeah, and I'm one of those that called it a military science fiction. It just had that feel. I don't see military sci-fi as always having to be a war. Though there are battles, in a majority of them. But yeah, it had that feel, and I think the fact that I knew you had experience with the Navy, being in it for so long, and I could really feel that experience packed into the novel. Especially because you use some of the lingo and even kind of poked fun at it, which I believe I put in my review of the book.
Yeah, that was actually great. And look, I don't mind it being called military science fiction. It's just that the more I write, the more I worry about the addiction all of speculative fiction has to violence.
Yeah.
And when I set out to write this, I was like, this is going to be cool because it's about merchants. And there is definitely violence, but there's also trade and discovering new worlds and all that stuff that is so great in Star Trek. I keep mentioning Star Trek. Maybe that's a mistake. I don't know. It's not an homage to Star Trek, but there are definitely things that Star Trek did that I love, like going to a new planet every week.
Yeah, and DeCastle, I'm pretty sure even said it was very Star Trek-y in his review.
He did. Bless him. Bless him.
y'all were just such best friends. I just know it. I know y'all like poking fun at each other too, because especially on the outset of TV Archon.
he is a great writer. He writes a great fight scene. He teases me remorselessly, and apparently I like that.
You just keep asking for it.
Exactly.
All right, so tell me, can you tell us a little bit about your next novel? And you can talk about the sequel to Artifact. You can talk about the sword a little bit more if you want to, or you can talk about maybe even the next thing that you're writing. But if you want to talk about all three, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
So briefly, the next book you see from me in speculative fiction will be Against All Gods. That's already written. That was written last year. Bronze Age fantasy, definitely epic. Like big screen, largest monster I've ever created, bigger than an island. Good times.
Wow.
But also kind of social commentary. Got a group, a culture of, that's what I want, culture of heroic pacifists who have to be conflicted about what's going on around them, but there's all kinds of cultural reasons why they managed to survive in a super bad world. And the world of Artifact Space was in part created by my realization that much as I love the Iliad, the world of the Iliad was hell for peasants and women, like literally hell, just hell. It's really only good for the 9 warriors on the beach with Achilles. Everyone else, this is the worst world ever. And I'd also become interested in what people call surveillance capitalism. And I really don't want to go too much deeper than that. It is super adventure-y. It has giant fight scenes, and yet it manages to, I hope, capture a little bit of social commentary. And I'll also say, just to pique some people's interest, it's in the same hermetical universe as Cold Iron and the Red Knight. And yes, I do intend to bring them all together in the end, because the gates connect them all, right? And in fact, by the time the Against All Gods trilogy is done, people who have been following this since the Red Knight will see that we're actually moving forward, and something may happen that will maybe involve all of them. I'm a big CJ Sherry fan, can you tell? Because I admit, she kind of did this with the Gates of Gavriel, but I'm using way more books to do it. So Against All Gods is the next thing you'll see. And right now I'm writing Deep Black, which is very complicated because I need to bring home the 100,000-year-old murder mystery. But in short, and I think without spoilering Artifact Space, there are mysteries at the heart of Artifact Space. One of them is what is xenoglass, and why is it so great, and why can't human beings replicate it? And that's at the very heart of Artifact Space, and it's in the first 50 pages, so I don't think I'm ruining the book for anyone. You could just let that go, but that would be a different writer. I'm not letting it go. So as the protagonists discover what's gone on over the last 150, really over the last million years, and who the races they're dealing with are and what the stakes are, they're going to gradually discover that they're basically bit players in an old problem. And maybe humanity isn't tough enough to deal with what's about to come down on them. Fun.
Cool. Yeah, exactly.
And then I also will say in the third book, which I would imagine at the current rate I won't write till like 2023, but in the third book that doesn't even have a title yet, Marka will go home finally, because it's a 4 or 5 year voyage, right? And I'm not going to blur through that. And when she goes home, you will have the enormously satisfying Marka gets to deal with the asshole who put her in this position from the first place. And I think that's enormously satisfying to the reader.
Oh yeah,
like
absolutely.
Whether humanity is doomed or not, Marka is going to get her asshole in the end. I don't think it sounds like a spoiler, but if you know how I write, I'm sorry, I write that the good guys win. I do not write that the bad guys win. And I just feel it's very satisfying to know that in the end, she will go back to City, dock her spaceship, and go like, okay, I've had enough of your crap.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's gonna be fantastic. Yeah, when you were talking about your first one, Against All Gods, I literally, the first thing that popped into my mind. Have you ever played the game Shadow of the Colossus, where you're this young, I guess you call it a knight, and you're fighting these giant creatures that are basically made of stone, and the entire time you're basically just scaling them until you get to a point where you can attack them and defeat them.
Right.
That's all I can imagine, because you said it's bigger than an island. And I'm like, these things are tall as skyscrapers, and there's certain points on each one that you could actually climb on. So you've got to really strategically find your moves. So
you are a smart guy. I won't say it's exactly like that, but you're on the right path. And when I was selling Against All Gods, the shout line was 1,000 years ago, good fought evil for the possession of the souls of everyone in the world, and evil won. Like,
sold.
It's a bad world. And your typical ragtag band of rebels, most of whom aren't good themselves. They've just been shafted by bad, and now they're pissed off. They team up with a group of very innocent pacifists to save the world. And while that shouldn't work, there's reasons why it might work, or maybe it won't work. Who knows?
Or maybe it might and it won't.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid that's more like the book I write. Like, I believe the good guys should win, but it's never a total win, because that's not what happens in the real world.
Right. And that's not fun. You want them to lose sometimes.
I believe that Tolkien made a famous...
Go back and lick their wounds.
Yeah. Tolkien made a famous comment once about how The Lord of the Rings wasn't an allegory of the Second World War, because if it was, Saruman would have built his own ring. The fall of Sauron would have poisoned the West, and the conflict would have just rolled on. And I may be misquoting, but good point, Mr. Tolkien. I'm glad you it's never just over.
Right. Exactly. So I got 2 questions left for you. One, what are some reads you've gone through this year that you would recommend? And then what is your favorite historical tidbit that you've learned recently?
So I'm reading Ben Galley's Shadow King right now, and it's on the kitchen table. I could go and grab it. Delightful, excellent. What else would I recommend? I hate this question, because the moment the stack of books goes away, it's gone out of my head.
This question's always coming.
John Gwynn's Shadow of the Gods. Gotta say, probably the best thing I've read this year. In fact, he made me spend money. I ran out and bought a Viking sword. Like, what higher level of praise can I offer than that? For people who read historical fiction, Matt Harfley, and the title has just gone out of my head. So just look up Matt Harfley on the internet. He has a bunch of really good historical fiction. I'll just pump Jeanette Ng again. Her Pendulum Sun, way outside my comfort zone. Last 2019, I guess. Really
so, yeah.
Good, really good book. But man, there's so much out there. And I have to warn you, I actually often detour to read really old books. So I recently reread all of C.J. Sherry's Merchanter's Luck, Down Below Station, all those books, and I would recommend them to anyone. And I realize that's not fair to struggling artists who want me to mention their book right now, but like, holy crap, she's a good writer. And a strong feminist writer. And I just want to throw this in for comedy's sake. The Pride of Shanur novels, which is like your house cat becomes a heroic space pirate. have some of the most hilarious and accurate, damningly accurate feminist commentary I have ever run into in a science fiction novel. And I don't feel like she gets enough love for that. Because in hers, like the women are warriors, the women cats are warriors, and the men like stay home on the farm and take care of the kids. And the constant playing on these gender roles is beautiful and hilarious. And you can't trust men to do anything. Like you can't put them on a spaceship because they just forget. That's just the way they're made. They're just really sex objects. So freaking good. And anyone who hasn't read The Pride of Shanur, please, it doesn't get much better than that. But John Gwynne, Shadow of the Gods, I guess is it ridiculous to push a good friend's book?
Not at all. I recommend it all the freaking time.
Yeah,
it's still my number one read so far this year. So
yeah. Hey, wait a minute! You read my book. Careful there, John. Whoa. Okay. Fine. So that's how friendships end, right there.
Christian's never going to come on my channel again.
You said you had 2 questions, so that was one.
Yeah, your second one. Your favorite historical tidbit you've learned recently. And if it makes you feel any better while you're thinking about that one, it's my favorite fantasy novel so far this year. Does that make it better?
That's good. I like that. That
right.
was good. My favorite historical tidbit. It's not a tidbit. It's more like a bigger factoid than that. I've been reading a lot about Carolingian Europe and Anglo-Saxon Europe and Viking Europe, and it's all John Gwynne's fault and partially Matthew Harfley's fault. I got really interested in the period, and I hate having a hole in my knowledge, so I just went like, hey, I don't really know that much about this period. So, we call these the Dark Ages. We're in the 7th, 8th, 9th century.
Mm-hmm.
I was just blown away how by 750 AD, 750, how much control the Carolingian kings had and how much writing they had, how much law. Where are these Dark Ages? I'm still looking for them. It's quite clear to me now that, in fact, in many ways, the Roman Empire never went down because the Carolingians just picked it up and ran with it. And, they did kind of conquer the whole of Europe. In fact, the author of the book I read came up with the catchphrase, the Carolingians invented the idea of Europe by sort of binding Italy and Gaul and whatever. Anyway, that was just freaking fascinating how much connectivity and how far people traveled and how frequently they traveled. And there's English monks in Rome in 750. That's my factoid of the month.
Nice. Well, Christian, thank you as always for coming and chatting with me.
Thanks for having me, man. It's never hard to talk to you, even if you don't think my book is the best thing you've read this year. No. You know what I say to people? I'm completely teasing you, but
no,
I always say to people,
I feel like the Castell now.
No, that's you feel like me because I never tease him. He just teases me. But I will say that. No, it's gone out of my head. Doesn't matter. It's gone. It's always fun to be teased by friends. I'll just leave it there.
There you go. So show us that beautiful cover again. So Artifact Space comes out on the 24th. Book 1, and what's the series called again?
Arcanae Imperiae. It's Latin. By the way, I just have to say this about the cover. See the ship? So, you got to know this because you know everybody in fantasy and science fiction. That's actually how the ships are. I'm stunned. The cover artist drew the ship in my book. Hey, but I have a question for you. I know you want to get to the end of this, but I have a question for you. Up? What did you like? And maybe what didn't you like? It's
about the book?
Yeah.
I don't know if there was much that I really didn't like. I really did like the fact that you didn't just have a giant war going on. That you mentioned about how that's how military science fiction usually is. That's usually how space operas are. I mean, it's usually just giant ships either colliding or attacking one another. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. You've got this big unknown that you've really got to uncover. Granted, you're doing it across 3 books, and he did it all in one.
That's kind of the way I roll.
Yeah. But I did really like the whole, Marka really trying to find her way around the ship, because she just gets on and she's like, okay, now what do I do? And she's kind of just thrust in different directions, and she really just like comes out on top, like constantly. Granted, she's just got this history that's just always looming, and people are always kind of giving her the second glance, But and you mentioned about the whole, how do ships land? I thought that was a really great addition to it, because generally it's just ship landed, crew gets off, go to the next thing, or unload cargo, etc. And you actually take the time to meticulously go to every step. And I don't see a whole lot of that in novels, especially clearly science fiction novels. And I don't see markers in space. I think the only one that I've read that actually has like maybe meeting points, I guess the Interdependency by John Scalzi.
Yeah. I got to say that Scalzi does all this very well.
Yeah.
I mean, he does almost everything very well, to be honest. What actually keyed me in that direction is my favorite read of 2 years ago was every book of The Expanse. Like, I just motored through all those books, and they are so good. But I kept going like, how did you land the spaceship? Like, oh, you just dock? You mean there's 1,500 other ships trying to dock, but you just weave in between them and park it? Like, come on. How does that work?
Tell me, Daniel Abraham.
No, I always want to know how everything works. And maybe that's my abetting sin. It may be both my virtue and my sin, but whatever.
See, it kind of like you do. It kind of comes back to video games in a sense, because I'm not one of those that just like wants to go straight through the story. Like, I want to see how everything works. I want to see, okay, if I do this, what happens? All right, if I do the reverse, what happens? So I'm like always like saving and overwriting and stuff my saves, because I want to see like what, A, B, C, D. I want to know what E, F, and G do. Like, and then I want to know, if I go into this room, am I going to die? Can I find stuff?
Yeah. It was a long time ago in games, and I don't even remember what it was called. It could have been called Ace of Aces. It was a really nice 2005 World War II air-to-air combat game, and it was really good. And my best friend had this game, which he guiltily played when his wife wasn't paying attention. And we got together for like 3 days at New Year's, and we always have. And he like said secretly, like, I've got a secret. And we snuck off to play it. And he basically said, I love the game, but I hate the fact that you have to learn how to land your Japanese fighter on an aircraft carrier. It's like a waste of time. I want to get to the air combat. I am the opposite. I was like, I have to actually land my plane on the carrier. That is fantastic. And I'll tell you that, to me, the most amazing thing was that I did the standard pattern. I won't bore you with what it is, but there's a standard way to land on an aircraft carrier. And I did it, even though I'm not a pilot. And it worked in the game. And I was like, oh, what? Like, that's amazing. Anyway.
You felt fulfilled?
I did. I think the word we're looking for here is validated.
There you go. But go ahead.
Unless my experience in the Navy, in fact, made me entitled. But let's leave that aside.
But yeah, so everybody go out and pre-order Artifact Space. It comes out on the 24th, so just in 7 days from this recording. Definitely looking forward to Against All Gods, because it just sounds amazing. And definitely looking forward to the sequel and the third book and the other 22 that you apparently plan to write in this world. And again,
if COVID will stop cooping me up inside my house, I'll slow down and write less. How's that?
Okay. Yeah, sure you will. And then I'll also be looking forward to that tour of your basement, because I want to see all your miniatures and all your armor and everything.
Next time you want to have me, we will go right down those stairs, and we'll see the basement in all its glory. And my wife will disown me, but and my daughter will say, they don't want to see how nerdy you are, Dad. That's disgusting.
You win some, you lose some, right?
Yeah, I hear you.
I'm called a nerd every day here. It's fine.
I glory in it. Like, live the dream.
Exactly.
I am the nerd that 17-year-old me wanted to be.
Living it to its fullest. Well, Christian, thank you. We'll clearly do this again. We're gonna start doing this like I don't know, every couple of months, if not less. So
Hey, thanks for having me. You have been such a force multiplier in helping me have a career, and I really appreciate it.
you're so welcome.
And someday I'll see you in person.
Absolutely. One of these days we're gonna make it happen. And we'll share a croissant and we'll write together.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, you enjoy the rest of your week and best of luck with the release.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christian.
I will be fighting in armor this weekend.